90 years later, 40,000 Negro men, women, and children voluntarily joined the nonviolent boycott of the Montgomery, Alabama municipally owned city buses. Some of them walked 20 miles a day to maintain their jobs and families. They walked and they carpooled to attract national media attention, to persuade the federal Supreme Court to rule that municipal segregation is unconstitutional and illegal. It took 382 days of voluntary suffering. Just before boarding a bus to signal victory, the leader of the boycott, 27-year-old Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., issued a statement. Listen for 6 calls to immediate personal action. He said, "The whole bus is now for the use of all people. Take a vacant seat. If cursed, do not curse back. If pushed, do not push back. If struck, do not strike back, but only evidence love and goodwill at all times. According to your own ability and personality, do not be afraid to experiment with new and creative techniques for accomplishing reconciliation and social change." 4 years later, in January of 1960, some college students disagreed and argued about it. But when they remembered the 9 teenagers who had desegregated Little Rock Central High School 3 years earlier in 1957, they concluded that they had the ability and the personality, and that they would surmount their fears, and that they would experiment with what for them would be a new and creative technique for accomplishing reconciliation and social change, but they didn't use those words. College students have bull sessions, and late one night, one of them said that they had no right to criticize others for not doing anything because they were not doing anything either. He said they had talked long enough. The time had come to act. 2 others in the room agreed. They said, yes, it's time to do something. The 4th student in the room hesitated. Like many of us, he didn't think they were ready. But before that session was over, he agreed and said he was in. And so the very next day, February 1st, 1960, Franklin McCain, Joseph McNeil, Ezell Blair Jr., and David Richmond walked into the Woolworths department store in the center of Greensboro, North Carolina. And they went over to the segregated whites-only lunch counter and they sat down, knowing that others had been severely beaten for doing the same thing. In an interview later that's easily accessible online, Franklin McCain said that the coffee urn had already been cleaned out, and so he asked for a Coke and donut. Well, it wasn't about a Coke and donut that he hurried to the office. Well, it wasn't about a Coke and donut that the waitress hurried to the office, where she was told to go about her work as usual. Follow our custom. Do not serve those college boys. They won't stay long. On the 3rd day, more than 300 people gathered on the sidewalk in front of the store in support of their voluntary, nonviolent, sit-in protest demonstration. And by the 3rd month, it had spread to more than 70 cities across 13 states. In Jackson, Mississippi, Methodist minister Reverend Edward King stood in the gap and encouraged them in support of the cause for which they were suffering. Before long, Reverend Edward King endured 13 surgeries to repair the broken bones in his face that were shattered while he was incarcerated for his involvement in the movement. 4 college students, 3 months, 75 cities, 13 surgeries, and the attention of the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, who went on national television and said that he deeply sympathized with those who were only trying to enjoy their civil rights guaranteed to them by the Constitution. And later that same year in November, John Kennedy was elected president. Soon he had other priorities. Civil rights again took a back seat, this time to pulling the world back from the brink of nuclear destruction by removing Russian warhead missiles from Cuba. Things do take on priority, and sometimes mine are not yours. Establishing the worldwide Peace Corps, flying a man to the moon and back home safely. But 3 years into his term, in June of 1963, President Kennedy proposed the most far-reaching and broad-sweeping civil rights legislation that Congress had ever seen. And 2 months later, on August 28, 250,000 people marched in Washington for jobs and freedom. And they gathered alongside the reflecting pool between the Washington Monument and Lincoln Memorial to hear Reverend King speak. Well into his carefully written manuscript, he read, "I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed." And that's when Mahalia Jackson stood up and interrupted him in front of 250,000 people when she yelled, "Martin, tell him about the dream." With hardly a moment's hesitation, he pushed his papers aside and he finished his speech without them from the center of his soul. He transitioned with, "And so, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill made low. The crooked places will be made straight, the rough places will be made plain, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope, and this is our faith. And with this faith, we will be able to hew out of a mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And this will be the day when all of God's children will sing with new meaning, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the Pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. If America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. And not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain, Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain, Tennessee, from every hill and molehill in Mississippi. Let freedom ring. And when we let this happen, when we let freedom ring from every village and every hamlet and every state and every city, we'll be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing from that old Negro spiritual, free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Congress delayed action on Kennedy's Civil Rights Bill. Southern senators filibustered for 75 days. And in November, President Kennedy was shot and killed in Dallas, Texas. 5 years later, in April 1968, Reverend King was shot and killed in Memphis, Tennessee.